If you're looking to get a budget 1080p gaming graphics card in 2024, odds are the RX 6600 from AMD is high on your list. But what kind of performance should you expect from this budget 1080p GPU? Well, to find out, I've run some benchmarks and the results are pretty surprising. The RX 6600 is a budget RDNA 2 offering from AMD, and it launched at that weird time when GPUs costed an arm and a leg. Remember those times? They weren't particularly brilliant. But 3 years on after its launch, the RX 6600 can be found on the new market for £200 or $215. And if you were willing to save a bit more money and shop used, you could find it for around £150 to £160. That's what I did because I picked up this MSI mech model boxed for just £160, which I think is quite a good deal. And the thing is, practically brand new as well. Taking a look at the RX 6600, and its specs are quite modest, with 1792 shading units, 8GB of GDDR6 memory, which is connected to the GPU via a 128-bit memory bus. 28 RT cores are present, which will accelerate RT effects, but that doesn't mean you should enable ray tracing on this graphics card, as we're about to find out from benchmarking. It's really not worth it. Anyways, does this budget graphics card from 2021 still have what it takes to play games at 1080p with high settings and 60 FPS? To find out what the RX 6600 is like, I've tested it at both 1080p and 1440p in my testing PC, which has an Intel Core i5-12400F, 32GB of dual rank, dual channel, 3200MHz DDR4 memory, an MSI B660-A Pro motherboard, and a 1TB Gen 4 NVMe SSD. I've left the RX 6600 at its stock out of the box settings, and resizable bar has been enabled. And lastly, all testing has been done using AMD Adrenalin driver 23.12.1. So let's see how this budget GPU gets on. Hogwarts Legacy is one of the newer games in my benchmarking roster, and to be fair, it's pretty decently easy to run, all things considered. Setting it to the high preset here today, and the 1080p performance on the RX 6600 was excellent. 71 FPS on average with 49 FPS for the 1% low is not bad at all. I know that 1% low figure is not exactly desirable, but the frame pacing in Hogsmeade is not particularly brilliant on any graphics card. 1440p does leave a little more to be desired, with 48 FPS on average and 33 FPS for the 1% low, so I'd stick to 1080p with the RX 6600 in Hogwarts Legacy. Cyberpunk 2077 tends to be a bit of an Nvidia stomping ground, and to be fair, that is probably true. However, at 1080p, the RX 6600 performed excellently. On the high preset, it got 68 FPS on average with 58 FPS for the 1% low. So what this means is the average is great as it's above 60 FPS, and the 1% low is also very good as it's close to the average frame rate, so it was a nice and smooth experience. Like Hogwarts Legacy, 1440p leaves a little more to be desired, getting just 41 FPS on average with 30 FPS for the 1% low. I mean, if you were cool with sort of a console-like experience, the 41 FPS might not be too bad for you, but I'd recommend sticking to 1080p in this title. God of War set to the high preset with ultra textures saw great performance across the board, getting 89 FPS on average at 1080p and 62 FPS on average at 1440p. The 1% lows were also looking brilliant with 79 FPS at 1080p and 57 FPS at 1440p. So if you wanted to play God of War at both 1080p or 1440p, the performance is fine at both of these resolutions. And then at 1080p, you could probably enable the Ultra preset and get around 60 odd FPS there, so that is something you could do. Just like Cyberpunk 2077, Fortnite does tend to be a bit of an Nvidia stomping ground, but that certainly does not matter today. At 1080p, the RX 6600 got 259 FPS on average, with a 1% low of 179. This is quite smooth for Fortnite, as it does seem to be a bit of a stutter fest, but on the DirectX 12 API, as long as you load in these shaders, it's really not that bad. A 1440p 144Hz experience is also possible with 172 FPS on average, and that 1% low was also looking great at 130 frames per second. So if you want to play Fortnite competitively, the RX 6600 is a great graphics card at both 1080p and 1440p. F123 on the high preset saw great performance at both 1080p and 1440p. The RX 6600 managed to push out 129 FPS on average with a 1% low of 108 FPS at 1080p, which is great. Maybe lower that to the medium preset if you want 144 FPS though. As for 1440p, if you were looking for a more casual experience, 93 FPS on average with a 1% low of 82 frames per second is great, smooth experience. And to be fair, the high preset does look quite good, and if you call with around 90 FPS, I would say that is not bad performance at all. Spider-Man Remastered is up next, and unlike the rest of the AAA games, I set this to very high, and to be fair, I'm glad I did, because at 1080p, the 6600 got 96 FPS on average with a 1% low of 64 FPS, and switching this up to 1440p saw the average drop down to 68 FPS, with 55 FPS for the 1% low. So, I mean, this is great performance on both resolutions, yet again on the very high preset. So for Spider-Man Remastered, the RX 6600 is an excellent graphics card for it. Just like God of War, I set Horizon Zero Dawn to the high preset but with ultra textures, and yet again, I'm glad I did because performance across the board was excellent. At 1080p, the RX 6600 got 89 FPS on average with a 1% low of 61 FPS. This was done in Meridian, which is the main city, so the frame pacing is slightly off, which explains the low 1% low. However, 1440p sees a reduction of the average frame rate going down to 63 FPS, and the 1% low is somewhat decent at 48 FPS. Yet again, 1080p is probably the better option here, but 1440p is still more than playable, and it looks great as well. The last rasterized game up today is Forza Horizon 5, and on the Ultra preset, performance across the board was excellent, especially at 1080p. Where the RX 6600 got 83 FPS on average with 70 FPS for the 1% low, that's great for both the average and 1% low right there. And switching up to 1440p sees that average drop down to 67 FPS, and the 1% low still stays relatively decent at 57 frames per second. So Forza Horizon 5 at both resolutions, perfectly fine. Looking at some of the ray tracing results, and I'm going to gloss through these really quickly, and Cyberpunk 2077 really isn't playable with both 1080p and 1440p delivering unplayable experiences from the RX 6600, and Spider-Man Remastered is slightly more playable, truth be known, compared to Cyberpunk 2077. However, it's not worth the performance drop, as 1080p goes down to 49 FPS and 1440p goes down to 34 FPS. I guess if you were sort of fine with a 30 FPS experience at 1440p, ray tracing in Spider-Man is somewhat viable, but I highly recommend you just disable ray tracing in every single game. Overall, in the games tested today, the RX 6600 has shown it's got what it takes to play games at 1080p. Even the heavy-hitting AAA titles like Hogwarts Legacy and Cyberpunk ran totally fine on the high preset, getting north of 60 FPS. And for a graphics card which costs for around £200 on the new market, I think that is an incredible feat. And of course, you've got your competitive esports games. I know the only one I tested today was Fortnite, but if games like Fortnite run in excess of 280 FPS on average at 1080p, I think you're going to be fine in games like Valorant, Counter-Strike, and Rainbow Six Siege. Those types of games will run perfectly fine on an RX 6600, as long as you pair it with a fairly competent processor. Maybe something like a Ryzen 5 5600 or a 12400F, something like that, would be a totally fine pairing for this graphics card. And even if you wanted to play 1440p in these titles, you're still set for a 144Hz experience, which is always great to know. In my testing under a gaming load, the RX 6600 pulled just north of 100 watts, so yes, it's really power efficient, and you could probably power this with a pretty decent 450 watt power supply, depending on which CPU you pair this with. Where the 6600 does start to struggle is 1440p AAA gaming. It's really not built for it, with games like Hogwarts Legacy and Cyberpunk 2077 dropping below 60 FPS on average, and you've also got to be careful with the VRAM usage as well. A lot of new AAA games will use more than 8GB of VRAM at 1440p, so this is something you need to look out for. Also, if you want to enable ray tracing on this graphics card, I have two words for you: don't bother. It's simply not worth the performance hit. Don't even think about enabling ray tracing on this graphics card. So it's clear to see which type of gamer this GPU is for, and that is the budget 1080p gamer who wants to play the latest AAA games at 1080p, high settings, and 60 FPS on average. And that is something the RX 6600 absolutely excels at. But if you're looking to get a bit more competitive into your games, a 1080p 240Hz experience is also possible on this. And if you wanted to up the resolution to 1440p, 144Hz is good there as well. When value for money is concerned, I think this graphics card is definitely one of the best on the market, and this is sort of a trademark of AMD. They just produce absolute value bangers like this. The 6700 XT and even the 7800 XT is good value as well. So if you want to get the absolute most from your money, the RX 6600 is certainly a GPU which should be on your radar. Despite its excellent value and budget performance, the RX 6600 is not for everyone. If you want to play games at 1440p, high settings, and maybe you want to push them frame rates a little bit more, this graphics card is simply not for you. That is because it just simply doesn't have the GPU compute power, and arguably it doesn't have the VRAM as well. This is why I'd recommend a more powerful GPU with more video memory like the 7800 X3D, no, that's a processor, like the 7800 XT, or maybe the upcoming RTX 4070 Super. Speaking of RTX cards, ray tracing is something that this graphics card does not perform well in at all. Like, just look at the performance lost in Cyberpunk and Spider-Man, it's really not worth it, so don't enable ray tracing on this. And if you're after a ray tracing experience, I'd recommend just shopping on Team Green and getting a much higher end graphics card, as ray tracing is still a premium feature in my opinion. So can I recommend the RX 6600 from AMD in 2024? And that will have to be a resounding yes. If you're looking for budget 1080p gaming performance and you want to play pretty much all of the newest AAA games and you want to get into some competitive titles as well with very high frame rates in them games, I think the RX 6600 for £200 or $215 brand new is an excellent deal. And if you're looking to stretch your money even further, you could get one used for around £150 and £160. But if you're looking to play 1440p games, maybe shy away from this graphics card. So with that being said, I'm going to leave this video here. There are two other GPU benchmarking videos right there, which might be right up your alley. And if you got this far into the video, I'd like to say thank you for sticking around this longer, and leave a like if you really liked the video. With that being said, I'll catch you in the next one, and have a good rest of your day.